Nina Castellano stood on her front porch on a cold Saturday morning in early November, watching strangers carry away pieces of her late husband Vincent's life. The estate sale had been her daughter Marie's idea. "Mom, you can't keep everything. Dad's been gone for 8 months. You need to start letting go." At 69, Nina knew Marie was probably right. The house was full of Vincent's things, his tools in the garage, his clothes still hanging in the closet, his collection of vinyl records, his books. Keeping it all wasn't bringing him back. It was just making the house feel like a museum to a man who was gone. But watching strangers rifle through Vincent's belongings, haggling over prices, carrying away things he'd touched and loved, it felt like betrayal, like she was erasing him. A woman emerged from the house carrying Vincent's old leather jacket, the one he'd worn for 30 years. Nina felt tears sting her eyes and turned away. "Mrs. Castellano?" A voice behind her made her turn. A young couple stood there, probably in their 30s, holding a cardboard box. "We found this in the back of the pantry. The sale organizer said to ask you about it before we bought it." Nina looked at the box. It was old, dusty, unmarked. She didn't recognize it. "What's in it?" "Recipe cards, mostly," the woman said. "Old ones, handwritten, and some notebooks. We collect vintage recipes, so we were interested, but they seem personal. We wanted to make sure you didn't want to keep them." Recipe cards. Nina's heart clenched. Vincent had been the cook in their family, not her. He'd loved cooking, had learned from his Italian grandmother, had spent hours in the kitchen creating meals that filled their home with warmth and incredible smells. "Can I see?" Nina asked. The couple handed her the box. Inside were dozens of index cards covered in handwriting, some in Vincent's familiar scrawl, others in an older, more careful script that must have been his grandmother's. There were also 3 small notebooks, the kind with marbled covers filled with recipes and notes. Nina's hands trembled as she flipped through the cards. Lasagna, braciole, chicken cacciatore. All the dishes Vincent used to make, the ones that had disappeared from their table in his final years when his arthritis made cooking too painful. "I'll keep these," Nina said, her voice thick. "Thank you for asking." The couple smiled and moved on to browse other items. Nina carried the box inside, away from the estate sale chaos, into the quiet of Vincent's den. She sat in his old chair, the leather one that still smelled faintly of his cologne, and began going through the box more carefully. Most of the recipes were familiar. She'd eaten these dishes hundreds of times over their 47 years of marriage. But tucked in the bottom of the box, she found something she'd never seen before. A recipe card in Vincent's handwriting, more careful than usual, as if he'd been concentrating hard on getting it right. At the top, in capital letters, Nonna's pear and ricotta crostata, the secret recipe. Below that, Vincent had written, "Nonna made this every Thanksgiving." She would never write it down, said it had to be learned by watching and feeling, not reading. "I watched her make it every year from the time I was 6 until she died when I was 19. This is my attempt to capture what she did. I have never made it. Too scared I'd get it wrong and dishonor her memory. But someday, maybe I'll be brave enough to try." The date at the bottom, November 1985, 39 years ago. Nina stared at the card. Vincent had written this before they were married, back when he was a young man grieving his beloved grandmother. And he'd kept it all these years, but never made the pie? She thought about all the Thanksgivings they'd shared, 47 of them. Vincent had always cooked an elaborate meal. Turkey, all the traditional sides, and always several Italian dishes too. But never this pie. Never Nonna's crostata. Why had he been too scared to make it? And why had he kept the recipe for nearly 40 years if he never intended to use it? Nina looked at the ingredients list. Pears, ricotta, pine nuts, honey, lemon zest, pastry dough. Nothing too complicated. The instructions were detailed, almost obsessively so, with notes in the margins. Nonna always used her hands here, said a spoon would be disrespectful to the cheese. The pears must be just barely ripe. If too soft, the crostata will be soggy. Don't overwork the dough or it will be tough. Nonna said the dough could feel your anxiety. It read less like a recipe and more like a love letter to his grandmother. Nina felt something stir in her chest, a mixture of sadness and curiosity, and something else she couldn't quite name. An idea, maybe, a purpose. She pulled out her phone and called Marie. Mom, is the sale going okay? Marie, what are you doing for Thanksgiving this year? A pause. Well, I assumed we'd do what we did last year. Go to that restaurant. It's easier than trying to cook a big meal without Dad. Last Thanksgiving, the first without Vincent, had been miserable. They'd gone to a nice restaurant, ordered turkey dinners, and sat in awkward silence, the absence of Vincent louder than any conversation. Marie's husband Tom had tried to fill the void with cheerful chatter about his job. Marie's two teenagers had been glued to their phones. Nina had picked at her food and cried in the restaurant bathroom. I want to host this year, Nina said. Here, like we used to. Mom, you don't cook. Dad always. I know, but I found something. One of your father's recipes. His grandmother's, actually. A pie she made every Thanksgiving. He wrote it down but never made it. I want to make it this year. I want to try. Marie was quiet. Then, are you sure? That sounds hard. Everything is hard right now. But this feels like something I should do. Will you come? You and Tom and the kids? Of course we'll come. But Mom, don't put too much pressure on yourself. If the pie doesn't work out, then it doesn't work out. But I have to try. After hanging up, Nina looked at the recipe again. Vincent's careful handwriting, his notes about his grandmother's hands, her wisdom, her way of making food with love instead of just following instructions. She thought about Vincent in his final months, his hands too stiff and painful to cook, watching cooking shows on TV instead, and telling Nina stories about his grandmother's kitchen. How he'd stand beside her, a small boy learning the magic of turning simple ingredients into something that made people gather around a table and feel like family. I'm going to make your Nona's pie, Nina whispered to the empty room, to Vincent's ghost, to the memory of the man who'd filled 47 Thanksgivings with love and incredible food. I'm going to try to do it right. For her, for you, for all of us. The recipe card felt like a message from Vincent, left for her to find. One last gift. One last challenge. One last way to feel connected to him. Nina spent the next 2 weeks preparing. She'd never been much of a cook. Vincent had always handled the kitchen, and she'd been happy to let him. Her skills extended to scrambled eggs, toast, and reheating leftovers. The idea of making an elaborate Italian dessert from a 40-year-old recipe was terrifying. But it also gave her something to focus on besides grief. She started small, practicing the pastry dough. The first batch was a disaster, too tough, as the recipe had warned. The dough could feel her anxiety, apparently. She tried again, this time trying to relax, to imagine Vincent's grandmother's hands, working the dough with confidence and love. The second batch was better. She practiced with the pears, learning to judge ripeness by feel. She bought ricotta from 3 different stores, tasting each one, trying to imagine which would have met Nona's standards. She called Marie halfway through the second week. Do you remember Dad talking about his grandmother? What was she like? She died before I was born, Mom. But Dad talked about her all the time. He said she was tough but loving, that her kitchen was the center of her world, that she'd survived coming to America from Italy with nothing and built a life through feeding people. He really loved her. She raised him after his parents died when he was 6. She was more like his mother than his grandmother. Nina hadn't known that or had forgotten. Vincent's parents had died in a car accident when he was young. His grandmother had taken him in, raised him alone, taught him everything she knew about cooking and life and love. And when she died, Vincent had been 19, devastated. He'd written down her most treasured recipe but had been too afraid to make it, too scared he'd get it wrong, and somehow dishonor her memory. Nina understood that fear now. She was terrified of getting this pie wrong, of disappointing Vincent's ghost, of failing at the one thing she was trying to do to honor him. But she was also determined. Vincent had carried this recipe for 39 years without making it. She would make it. She would be brave enough for both of them. Thanksgiving morning arrived cold and bright. Marie, Tom, and the teenagers, Jake, 17, and Emma, 15, were due at 2 o'clock. Nina had been up since 6, working in the kitchen. She'd decided to make not just the crostata, but a full Thanksgiving meal, the way Vincent used to. She'd found more of his recipes in the box: his turkey brine, his Italian sausage stuffing, his roasted vegetables with herbs. It was ambitious, maybe foolishly so, for someone who barely cooked. But it felt important. It felt like bringing Vincent back, just for one day. By noon, the kitchen was chaos. The turkey was in the oven, but Nina wasn't sure she'd brined it correctly. The stuffing was in a bowl, waiting to go in the bird, but it looked different from how she remembered Vincent's looking. The vegetables were prepped, but she wasn't confident about the timing. And the crostata, the centerpiece, the whole reason for this ambitious attempt, sat on the counter in its pan, waiting to go into the oven. Nina had followed Vincent's instructions as carefully as she could. The pastry dough had come together better than her practice attempts. The pear and ricotta fillings smelled heavenly, sweet and fragrant with lemon and honey. The pine nuts were toasted to golden perfection. But would it taste right? Would it be what Nona had made? Would Vincent approve? Nina would never know, but she'd tried. She'd done her best. At 2 o'clock, Marie's family arrived. Emma and Jake looked skeptical when they saw the spread Nina was attempting. "Grandma, you cooked all this?" Emma asked. "You never cook." "Your grandfather cooked all this," Nina corrected. "I'm just following his recipes." "That's really sweet, Mom," Marie said, though Nina could see worry in her eyes. "But you should have let us help. This is too much for one person." "I needed to do it myself," Nina said. "I needed to try." They sat down to eat at 3 o'clock. The turkey was slightly dry. Nina had overcooked it, nervous about undercooking. The stuffing was good, but not quite as flavorful as Vincent's had been. The vegetables were fine, nothing special. But everyone ate. Everyone said it was delicious, even though Nina knew they were being kind. And for the first time since Vincent died, Nina's dining room felt alive again. Felt like Thanksgiving. After the meal, after the dishes were cleared, Nina brought out the crostata. She'd baked it while they ate dinner, following Vincent's detailed timing instructions. It had come out of the oven golden and fragrant, the pears visible through the lattice top, the whole thing smelling of honey and butter, and something indefinably comforting. "What is that?" Tom asked. "It smells incredible." "This is Nana's pear and ricotta crostata," Nina said, her voice shaking slightly. "Vincent's grandmother made it every Thanksgiving. Vincent wrote down the recipe 39 years ago but never made it. This is my attempt." She cut into it, revealing the creamy ricotta filling studded with tender pears and pine nuts. The pastry was golden and flaky. It looked beautiful. Nina served slices to everyone. Her own hands were trembling as she took her first bite. The taste transported her. Sweet, but not too sweet. The ricotta creamy and delicate, the pears soft and honeyed, the pine nuts adding texture and richness. The pastry melted in her mouth, buttery and perfect. It was extraordinary, unlike anything Nina had ever tasted, unlike any American pie she'd ever had. And somehow, impossibly, it tasted like Vincent, like his cooking, like the love he'd put into every meal he'd ever made for their family. Nina started crying. Not sad tears this time, but something else. Relief, joy, connection. "Grandma?" Emma looked worried. "Is it bad?" "No," Nina managed. "No, it's perfect. It's exactly right." Marie took a bite and her eyes widened. "Mom, oh my God, this is incredible." "It tastes like Dad's cooking," Marie said, tears in her own eyes now. "How did you do that?" "I just followed his instructions, his grandmother's instructions." They ate in silence, savoring every bite. The crostata disappeared quickly, everyone going back for seconds. Even the teenagers, who normally had to be bribed to try new foods, ate enthusiastically. "Grandma," Jake said, "this is really good, like really good. Better than any pie I've ever had." "Can you make this every Thanksgiving?" Emma asked. "This needs to be a tradition." Nina looked at her granddaughter, at the smudge of ricotta on her chin, at the genuine enthusiasm in her face. Yes, Nina said. Yes, I think I will. After everyone left, Nina sat in Vincent's chair in the den, holding the recipe card. The estate sale seemed like a lifetime ago, though it had only been 2 weeks. If that young couple hadn't asked about the box of recipes, Nina might never have found this card. Might never have known about Nana's crostata, about Vincent's 40-year fear of making it, about the gift he'd left her without even knowing it. She thought about Vincent writing down this recipe at 25 years old, grieving his grandmother, trying to capture something ineffable, not just ingredients and techniques, but love and tradition and memory. Trying to preserve something precious. He'd kept the recipe for 39 years. Carried it through moves, through the years of their marriage, through the births of their daughter and grandchildren. Kept it but never made it, never quite brave enough to try. And now Nina had made it, had been brave enough for both of them, had brought Nona's pie back into the world after what must have been 60 years or more. She felt Vincent's presence strongly. Not in a supernatural way, but in the way you feel someone you love even when they're gone. In the recipe card in her hands. In the taste of the crostata still lingering on her tongue. In the full belly and warm house and reconnected family that food had created. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for leaving me this. Thank you for writing it down even though you were scared. Thank you for keeping it all these years. It was exactly what I needed." The next morning, Nina woke with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in months. She got up, made coffee, and pulled out the box of Vincent's recipes. There were dozens more in there. Nana's recipes, Vincent's own creations, family dishes passed down through generations. Nina began organizing them, reading through each one, imagining Vincent's hands writing the words, his voice explaining the techniques. Each recipe was a piece of him, a piece of his history, a piece he was giving her. She called Marie. "I've been thinking, I want to learn to cook, really cook. All of Dad's recipes. All of Nana's recipes. I want to learn them and make them and keep them alive." "Mom, that's beautiful. But that's a lot. Are you sure?" "I'm sure. I need a project. I need something to do besides grieve. And this feels right. It feels like the right way to honor him. Can I help? I'd love to learn too. Dad tried to teach me some things over the years, but I was always too busy, too distracted. I wish I'd paid more attention." "We'll learn together," Nina said. "We'll figure it out together." Over the following weeks, Nina and Marie began working their way through Vincent's recipes. Not all at once, that would be overwhelming. But 1 or 2 a week, usually on Sundays when Marie could come over. They made Nana's lasagna, layering the pasta and sauce and cheese exactly as Vincent's notes described. It took them 3 tries to get it right, but when they finally did, Marie cried. "This tastes exactly like Dad's lasagna, exactly." They made braciole, rolling beef around a filling of herbs and cheese, simmering it in tomato sauce for hours until the meat was tender enough to cut with a fork. They made chicken cacciatore, stracciatella soup, eggplant parmesan, ricotta cookies. Some attempts were disasters, some were mediocre. But some, like that first crostata, were perfect, were exactly right, were the taste of love and tradition and family. And with each recipe they mastered. Nina felt less alone, felt more connected to Vincent, to his grandmother, to the long line of Italian cooks who'd passed down these dishes through generations. The teenagers started coming to the Sunday cooking sessions too. Emma, who'd never shown any interest in cooking, turned out to have a natural touch with pasta dough. Jake loved the braciole, asked to learn how to make it, and started experimenting with his own variations. Nina's house, which had felt like a tomb for 8 months, felt alive again, smelled like garlic and tomatoes and baking bread, sounded like laughter and stories and family. In early December, Nina found another recipe card tucked in the back of one of the notebooks. This one was different, not a recipe, but a letter, Vincent's handwriting, addressed to her. "Nina, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry. I wanted more time with you. I know you're probably thinking you should have learned to cook, should have paid more attention when I tried to teach you. Don't beat yourself up. You had your own gifts, your own ways of showing love. But if you want to learn now, all my recipes are yours. Nana's recipes too. They're waiting for you, just in case. The crostata recipe, the one I never made, that one's special. I was always too scared to try it. Too afraid I'd dishonor Nana's memory by getting it wrong. But I think maybe being afraid to try is the real dishonor. She would have wanted her recipes to live on, to feed people, to bring families together. If you find that recipe, I hope you'll be braver than I was. I hope you'll make it. And I hope you'll think of me and Nana and all the Thanksgivings we shared. I love you. I'll always love you. Vincent. Nina read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. He'd known. He'd left these recipes for her on purpose, left them as a gift, as a way to stay connected even after death. And the crostata, he'd wanted her to make it. Wanted her to be brave enough to try. She had been. She'd succeeded. And in doing so, she'd found a path back to life, to family, to purpose. Nina folded the letter carefully and placed it in her wallet, where she could carry it with her always. That Sunday, when Marie and the kids came over, Nina showed them Vincent's letter. "Grandpa left these recipes for you?" Emma asked, looking at the box with new reverence. "For all of us," Nina said, "to keep our family connected, to remember where we came from." "That's really beautiful," Jake said quietly. "I have an idea," Marie said. "What if we put together a family cookbook? All of Dad's recipes, all of Nana's recipes, all the ones we've learned and mastered. We could make copies for everyone, pass it down to future generations." Nina loved the idea. Over the next few months they worked on the cookbook. Nina typed up each recipe, including Vincent's notes and memories. Marie designed the layout. Emma illustrated it with drawings of Italian ingredients and kitchen scenes. Jake wrote introductions to each section, telling stories about Vincent and his cooking. The finished cookbook was beautiful, a spiral-bound collection of family recipes, each one annotated with memories and stories. They made copies for everyone in the family, even distant relatives. And on the first page, Nina placed a photo of the original crostata recipe card, Vincent's careful handwriting preserved forever, along with his letter encouraging her to be brave enough to try. When Thanksgiving came around again, the second without Vincent, but somehow easier than the first, Nina's house was full. Marie and her family, of course. But also Vincent's brother and his family, some cousins, even a few neighbors who'd heard about Nina's cooking and asked if they could join. Nina made the full Thanksgiving spread, all from Vincent's recipes. And for dessert, Nona's pear and ricotta crostata. "This is a family tradition now," Nina announced as she brought out the pie. "Every Thanksgiving we make this. We remember Nana, who made it for her family. We remember Vincent, who loved it but was too scared to recreate it. And we remember that sometimes being brave enough to try is the greatest act of love." She cut into the crostata, her second time making it, and somehow even better than the first. The room filled with that incredible smell of honey and pears and butter. Everyone ate, everyone praised, everyone felt the connection, the tradition, the love baked into every bite. And Nina, serving pie to her extended family in the house she'd shared with Vincent for 47 years, felt something she hadn't felt since he died. Complete. Not because the grief was gone, it would never be completely gone, but because she'd found a way to transform it, to take the loss and make something beautiful from it. Vincent had given her one last gift, the challenge to be brave, to try something new, to honor the past by keeping it alive. And she had risen to that challenge, had made Nana's pie, had learned to cook, had brought her family together around food and memory and love. Later that evening, after everyone had left and the kitchen was clean, Nina sat in Vincent's chair with a cup of tea and the recipe card that had started everything. "I did it," she said to Vincent's memory, to his ghost, to the love that still filled this house. "I made Nana's pie, and it was perfect. You would have been proud." She imagined she could hear his voice, warm and approving. "I am proud. I always was." Nina closed her eyes, holding the recipe card close to her heart, and gave thanks. For Vincent, for Nana, for family, for recipes that carried love across generations, for the courage to try new things even when you're terrified, and for the discovery that sometimes the greatest gifts come in the form of flour-stained index cards found in dusty boxes at estate sales. The crostata had been perfect, but more than that, it had been exactly what Nina needed. A way to honor the past, a way to connect with the present, A way to keep love alive in the kitchen, in the family, in the simple act of mixing ricotta and pears, and making something beautiful to share.